I love TypeScript. I think it's fantastic. It's 10 years old. We're already starting to see people aggressively pursue changes to the TypeScript formula. The two areas that I've seen the most excitement about are rewriting the type checker or transpiling the type checker source code into a faster language.
This is 20-Minute JavaScript, a weekly show where I, your host, interview members of the JavaScript community about all topics concerning JavaScript. The 20-Minute JavaScript show is brought to you by OpenReplay, an open source session replay platform meant for developers. If you'd like to know more, visit openreplay.com. If you'd like to be on the show or suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at the 20MinJS. Welcome to episode 34. I'm Fernando, and today we're going to be talking about TypeScript and whether or not you should be learning it as a JavaScript developer. Our guest actually wrote a book about the topic called Learning TypeScript. He's been using it for over a decade, and he's here to try and shine some light on TypeScript. He also has some very interesting story about how he got into some legal trouble with Nintendo, and he might share some of it with us. So stick around to the end for that. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Josh Goldberg. Please go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I am Josh. I'm excited to be here. How are you, Fernando?
I am good and actually very excited as well because TypeScript is a topic that has had me go back and forth actually during my career. I love JavaScript to the bottom of my heart. I think in JavaScript actually. And when TypeScript came about, I went through CoffeeScript. I went through a lot of things. And when TypeScript came about, I was one of those stubborn developers who said, well, if you can't really, you shouldn't go for like a different language. You should just properly learn the one that you're dealing with. So you don't like prototyping, you don't like, the lack of types, just deal with it. That used to be me. Then I kind of gave TypeScript a try and I kind of like it. So right now I'm in between. I'm kind of, do I need it? Do I not need it? So I think it's interesting that we have you here. You wrote a book about learning TypeScript, which we're going to be talking about in a bit. But so you went through a process, you actually wrote a book about it, and it's been actually quite successful from what I've been looking at. So I want to know what you think. Let's tackle the first of many pink elephants in the room. As a JavaScript developer, do you have to learn TypeScript? Is it a must do for a JavaScript developer? What do you think?
It's a great question. My professional opinion is that you do not have to learn TypeScript, but it is one of the best ideas out there for things you can learn. There are a bajillion technologies out there: TypeScript, design systems, libraries like CSS and JS, Next.js, Remix, blah, blah, blah. Many companies use TypeScript. So if you want to get a job at many of these companies, it is very helpful, sometimes necessary, to learn TypeScript. But TypeScript is not a complete reinvention of JavaScript. It doesn't fundamentally change the code that's running in the browser. It just improves your ability to write it and improves the dev tooling for you. So if you just don't want to use JavaScript, if TypeScript just makes your soul unhappy and you hate types and you hate Microsoft still, you can exist as a JavaScript developer. That's totally fine.
All right. That's good to know. That's good to know. All right. So let's try to understand why would we want to learn it, why would we want to go through the process. Because it's true, like you said, that it doesn't change the language at all. I mean, not at all, but it doesn't change the language that much if you don't want to. But I've seen TypeScript code that makes no sense to me. So, I mean, I guess it's up to the developer and how far they want to take it. But damn, I've seen some code with generics and stuff that still gives me nightmares. So one of the main reasons, if you will, or the ones that I've heard at least for switching to TypeScript is, the classic, well, if you have a type system, then you're safe at a compilation step from making silly mistakes, from adding stupid bugs essentially to your code. the classic, misassignment and changing types and then doing some operations and getting the wrong results out of it. But that kind of, that's why we have unit tests. So what kind of other benefits do I get from switching into a type language such as TypeScript?
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions, Fernando. Do you have a favorite fall
I'm the one
outfit?
supposed to be asking questions. All right, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I want to answer your question effectively, and in order to do so, I'll need a little bit of information from
That's
you.
fair. That's fair.
Great. Do you have a favorite fall outfit for when it starts to get colder? And if so, does it include a scarf?
Well, I guess no. I don't know.
Oh, well, the analogy I like to give is that no one single unit of clothing is essential and important for an outfit beyond the ability to, wear the outfit. Like you can always replace a t-shirt or a scarf. But just because a scarf doesn't alone save you from the fall, winter cold, doesn't mean that the scarf isn't useful. Yes, TypeScript does, in a very small part, compete with some unit tests, but I don't think that that's really what TypeScript is for. TypeScript is not there to validate at test time that your code works. TypeScript is there to stop you from writing code that you shouldn't have written in the first place, in part. So if you're finding that in converting to TypeScript, your unit tests become unnecessary, then I'm wondering, why did you write those unit tests in the first place? Now, sometimes there are legitimate reasons to write unit tests for things that are not type safe. Like if a function is exposed to users and you have an API, let's say a Node API, and you want to make sure that if someone passes in a string instead of the expected number, a nice error is thrown, then sure, write a unit test for that. But again, that's not what TypeScript is for. I'd say that TypeScript is part of a good dev cycle for a project. And it works really well with unit tests, and it works really well with other things, say end-to-end tests, user testing, and so on. TypeScript also has a lot of benefits that are great around developer time tooling. If you've ever used something like, say, VS Code, you've probably benefited from TypeScript, even if you've just written JavaScript, because TypeScript is what powers VS Code's auto-completion, find all references, go-to definition, and so on. So I'd say TypeScript has a lot of things that work really well for JavaScript and TypeScript code. And when you write TypeScript code, those things get better. It is not the case that, oh, you can use TypeScript, so you don't have to write unit tests and you don't have to end-to-end test and so on and so forth. You don't have to think about your code. Does that all kind of make sense and make you excited about fall outfits?
I kind of screw your analogy by saying that I don't wear a scarf, but
Yeah.
sorry about that. But I got it. Yeah, and definitely, I guess it makes sense. So it's a tool essentially, and it's not a replacement for things like unit tests. And I agree completely with you. So moving forward, we're talking about TypeScript and saying, so the fact that TypeScript is a typed language, that's why you want to switch into it. But if you do a quick search, it's not the only one. You have many other past and present transpilers that are trying to do the same as TypeScript with different flavors, with different opinions about certain things. So why is TypeScript the chosen one? Why is it that one the one we have to go to? Is it because Microsoft is behind it, or why exactly?
Oh, I actually really like the phrasing you're using, that TypeScript is the chosen one. I'm going to use that. Thank you.
Right.
We'll give credit. Part of it is that TypeScript happened to be one of the first really good entries into the market, which means people didn't feel a need to write their own TypeScript. Part of it is that TypeScript is really, really, really good, that it was created by people who knew what they were doing, Anders Hallsberg and a fantastic team. And part of it is, yes, that TypeScript is integrated into products like VS Code and thus is by default the first thing many people use. To give a little bit of a history lesson that wraps all that together, TypeScript was open sourced a little over just 10 years ago, and at the time was not nearly as feature complete or useful as it is now, but it was still really, really useful. And in fact, they were marketing it for two purposes. One was what we know and love today, which is adding type safety to your JavaScript. And the other was something you may have heard of called transpilation, where you are able to use newer JavaScript features today, which now is a joke that I make and people chuckle and go, ha ha, of course I've heard of that. But at the time, that was still
That was you. Yeah,
new.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you could use classes in JavaScript. Wow, classes, the future of JavaScript. We're all going to become object-oriented. Wow, wow. No. So since then, TypeScript has kind of evolved. But through that process of dropping the emphasis on letting you use classes and enforcing to people mentally, yes, TypeScript does not change your architecture, just makes it better to write. We have kind of seen that the incredibly powerful type system of TypeScript and all the features and fantastic community, such as definitely typed, the third-party type definitions, mean that TypeScript is just a powerful, fantastic solution that would take an incredible amount of effort, time, and developers to recreate elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key, right? I mean, it wasn't the first one. It was probably, like you said, the first good one or good enough to make a dent, and then it's hard to compete against 10 years of community, 10 years of development, of bug fixing, of feature development. Um, so yeah, I see why we're talking about TypeScript now. So that doesn't keep JavaScript from trying, and I honestly don't know why, but it doesn't keep JavaScript from trying to add certain features from TypeScript. More recently, the type annotation proposal, it's still a proposal, it's not yet defined, but apparently there is a subset of JavaScript developers who think they can somehow add type safety through comments as a native construct within JavaScript with this proposal. So I think I know what you're gonna say, but would this be a killer, a TypeScript killer? Would this be the beginning of the end for many TypeScript users to start seeing, I don't need TypeScript anymore because I have all I need here?
As I'm guessing you're guessing, I will say no, it is not a TypeScript killer. In fact, it is a TypeScript helper. There are two things we should really disambiguate here that people get confused a lot. There's type syntax, type annotations, interface declarations, and so on. And then there is type checking, the thing that looks at your code and yells at you with the red squigglies. Those two are extremely separate processes and things. Type checking is a complex, difficult to engineer process that does not happen at runtime for the vast majority of applications, nor should it. It is something that happens when you run TypeScript on your code as a type checker. Now, the code that gets run on by the type checker has type annotations often in it. And standardizing those type annotations syntax in some amount in JavaScript is going to be really nice for TypeScript, because that means that maybe we'll be able to write .js files and not have to transpile .ts to .js or .tsx to JS and so on. So I'm really excited about this proposal. I think it's fantastic. It's had a lot of really, really good people working on it, folks who know their stuff with JavaScript and TypeScript and even maybe Flow, which is like the Facebook TypeScript that never really got everywhere. So it's going to be great, and it's going to make tooling a lot simpler for a lot of people, but it only proposes standardizing the type annotations. It does not propose standardizing the type checker, which means that we're still going to have TypeScript.
Right. But do you think that, and now we're moving to JavaScript, but do you think that it kind of pollutes the names, not the namespace, but kind of the ecosystem of JavaScript, essentially? You're conceptually, JavaScript is not a type language. Conceptually, you should take advantage of that. Yeah. So the fact that the language doesn't have types is not a handicap. It's actually a feature that you, as a developer, should be using. So isn't this like going against the philosophy of JavaScript? What do you think about that?
I would push back against part of that question, but I really like the question. Thank you for asking it. I don't think it pushes against the philosophy of JavaScript, and I don't think it forces anyone to use type annotations. In fact, I think actually it helps defragment the ecosystem. Right now, the vast majority of enterprise professional JavaScript developers are not technically writing JavaScript, they're writing TypeScript. So the ecosystem today is fragmented, and it's fragmented in a way that's harder to get back to the original than the proposal is going to lead us to. It's harder to get back to TypeScript. It's harder to get back from TypeScript to JavaScript because we are writing TS files and assuming that we're running on TypeScript. So if we help standardize that a little bit, it means that if a competitor to TypeScript comes out, it's very likely that the syntax will be shared more heavily between it and TypeScript, and the process of moving your code from your current non-JavaScript extension to TypeScript will be, or pardon me, to the new thing will be easier. That being said, I will also note that I think it's ready. We are ready for a new TypeScript. I love TypeScript. I think it's fantastic. It's 10 years old. We're already starting to see people aggressively pursue changes to the TypeScript formula. The two areas that I've seen the most excitement about are rewriting the type checker or transpiling the type checker source code into a faster language because the type checker can be slow. And also a really exciting project called Esno, which structurally adds much more advanced capabilities to the type checker's ability to track your variables types, so that variables that could be two or more possible things are better understood where in your code they are one or fewer of those things. So I'm really excited about this. I think that it's the right time in the community to start looking at making it easier to move off TypeScript, even though I still love TypeScript and like many popular tools, it's going to stick around for years and years and years.
Interesting. I hadn't heard about that. All right, so it's like the next step essentially in this evolution, if you want.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. So say you convince me into using TypeScript. Where do I start? Keep in mind, I've been coding for JavaScript for like 20 years. I learned to live with the lack of types. Um, what would be your recommendation for me to jump into TypeScript? Do I go like all in and start adding type annotations and you know take it? Well, I can already use classes in JavaScript, but like adding interfaces and going completely or as OP as I can, or do I just slowly ease into it and add any annotations like type any for everything and then slowly start like get into a detail nitty gritty detail of what kind of type I'm using and changing things one by one? What would be your recommendation here?
It's a great question. I think it's two questions, and I'll answer one first and then yield the execution flow back to you. I think the two
Okay.
questions there are how do I convert myself to TypeScript knowledge wise? And then it's how do I convert my project to TypeScript? And the project question is a little easier to answer, or at least shorter, so I will answer it first. You have a project, it's a lot of code, it was written in JavaScript, so it probably doesn't adhere to the TypeScript specific best practices you're going to eventually want to use. So I say one at a time, as easy as possible, especially if you have other people working on the project who are not TypeScript aficionados. You don't want to ever go all in on a new technology without the proper preparation. It's really painful to use a new language, TypeScript or otherwise. You mentioned earlier you've seen some horrifying generics. I have both seen and written horrifying generics, horrifying examples of more fancy features in the type system.
Right.
So maybe when you're just learning what a type annotation is and how the type checker analyzes your flow, don't add 300 lines of advanced conditional logic. Most of the time when I've led a TypeScript conversion, what we have done is started off with the allow JS option, which means you can convert one file at a time to TypeScript in your existing code base. And we've looked at the leaf nodes first, meaning the files that don't import any other JavaScript or TypeScript source files. We do basically a graph search on the code, meaning we understand which files require which files or imports. And then we convert the files that don't require any JavaScript or TypeScript first. Then we convert the files that require them, and so on and so forth. A TypeScript file never ends up importing a JavaScript file, just JavaScript importing TypeScript. The benefit of that is you get to modify your files as simply as possible. You never have to modify a TypeScript file that's importing some untyped JS things, so it doesn't know what that file looks like. And then you can typically start with the simpler components first, because the leaf nodes tend to be simpler. So you don't want to do the really, really fancy 3,000 line multi-components first. You want to do like the buttons and the very simple landing pages. Once you've gotten comfortable with the simple things, then you can move on to more complex ones. But I would also highly recommend, if you're doing this as a team, set up knowledge sharing. Do things like one-on-one pairs with folks who are and are not very familiar with TypeScript. Maybe do some deep dives, brown bags, presentations, whatever your team calls those, just to make sure that everyone is both excited about TypeScript and learning the same fundamentals as each other. How does that all sound?
Sounds reasonable. I actually like the approach of going from the leaf nodes up to the tree, the import tree. Sounds smart. All right. So that's one question. So how do I then, and moving on to the next one, um, where do I learn? What kind of resources are out there? I know that Microsoft site is actually super useful, and the documentation has to be said is quite phenomenal and very detailed. But what kind of other resources would you recommend for someone starting out on TypeScript and like wanting to start, making the switch?
I love this. There are 4 resources I want to plug. One of them is what you just said, so that makes it easy, typescriptlang.org. I
Yeah,
agree. It's a great site. Whenever I do like a 30, 60-minute tutorial, I just hop on the TypeScript website and then pop into their playground, which is a very trimmed down version of VS Code in the browser using their famous Monaco editor. It's a great place. Good docs, good playground. Love it. I also should plug my book here because I do stand by
absolutely.
the book. If you don't like books, that's fine. I'll give a couple of other recommendations later, but I really like reading books and writing code as I read a book. So, Learning TypeScript, which is available on learningtypescript.com, through O'Reilly, through Amazon, through Goodreads, etc. It is a book that teaches you TypeScript if you've never programmed in a typed language, anything other than JavaScript before. It goes through a lot of what I think are the fundamentals of TypeScript, type narrowing, object types, discriminating unions, and so on, and then goes through all the features you need, like functions, classes, arrays, etc. So, would recommend. But I recognize it used to be that people would buy an O'Reilly book, learning TypeScript through O'Reilly, and that was the be all and end all, but that's not the case anymore. People like videos and tutorials and workshops. So I want to plug 2 workshops, neither of which I have used because I know TypeScript already, but I know them to be really good and I trust the people who wrote them. One is totaltypescript.com, which is a comprehensive production grade TypeScript training by Matt Pocock, who is just a fantastic person to follow on Twitter for TypeScript advice. People have started pinging Matt constantly for advice, which I would be, overwhelmed by, but good on you, Matt. And then also tsforjs.com, which is from Shande Person, who is also fantastic, also a very good person to follow. I unfortunately can't give a recommendation of one versus the other, but I've skimmed through them. I trust the presenters; they're great. So highly
Awesome.
recommend.
Definitely, and we'll add links to those on the show notes so people can easily click on them and get to them. All right, so we know where to go. How hard is it to learning TypeScript? For like again, maybe I'm guessing here because I already had the baggage here, but maybe someone who's just getting started with JavaScript or TypeScript at all, so essentially with programming, it might be easier for them to pick up on TypeScript than someone who's like me, being spoiled, if you will, by the lack of types on JavaScript for like 20 years. Kind of, I've had that experience of at least at first, like feeling like I'm hitting a wall because I want to do something that I know I can because essentially this is all JavaScript, but the then compiler is not letting me because I'm not using the right annotation, I'm not using the right type, the right structure. So is this a common case essentially? Would more experienced JavaScript developers have a harder time picking up TypeScript?
I don't think that specifically JavaScript experience gets you a better time with TypeScript, but I think generally debugging confusing errors experience will get you a better time with TypeScript, or really with learning any new language. One of the current meh parts of TypeScript is that their error messages are not as great as they could or should be. If you look at other languages like Rust that have come out since TypeScript, they have quite good error messages, and TypeScript is over time improving, but it's not there yet. I'd also say dev tooling for the JavaScript space doesn't really lend itself to rich interactive error messages. VS Code gives you a few text blocks and a couple of links. whereas other systems that one could imagine might give you better coloring of red versus green and arrows pointing. You declared it here and there it's not, and so on. So I'd say if you ask any person who's written a book on a subject, is it easy? They'll first in their mind go, oh yeah, no, totally easy. And then they'll realize, wait, everyone thinks differently. Everyone learns
Yeah.
differently. I think the fundamentals of TypeScript are something that any JavaScript developer of more than a year can pick up. Whether you personally jive well with the advanced types is a matter of how your mind works and how much time you've taken to learn it. But I've yet to see a developer who tries to learn TypeScript, spends a good amount of time on it, talks to me, and then still fails. I think it's totally reasonable that anyone can learn TypeScript if they know JavaScript. It's intended for JavaScript developers.
Yeah, that's fair. I like the fact that, if they can learn it, they have to talk to you. That's that should do it. So you seem like a fan of TypeScript. What would you say is your favorite feature? Yeah, I mean, I've come to like the language, and I come to like some features. So what would be your favorite one?
Ooh, don't let me forget. After I answer, I want to hear your answer too.
Oh, damn it!
Don't worry, I'll give you time. My favorite feature, it's hard. There are a lot of good ones. I think it's discriminated unions. For those who haven't touched this thing yet, it's not a bad word. Discrimination comes from the idea of separating multiple things. It's the idea of an object type that describes an object where, based on one property, it might look like different things. Like you might have a type property, and if the type is fruit, then it has a juicy Boolean. And if the type is vegetable, it has like a, I don't know, ground Boolean. I don't know my fruits and vegetables. And then based off of that that type property, if you check whether it's equal to, say, fruit or vegetable, TypeScript is able to type narrow your code. Now, there are maybe a few classifications of people who heard this description. If you had no idea what I was talking about, that's totally fine. It relies on understanding other TypeScript foundational concepts. So go read my book or take one of those classes. If you did understand what I was talking about, I hope you also think that's pretty cool, because I think it pulls together all the really fun part of TypeScript, the object typing, the structural typing, type narrowing together in this beautiful little package that demonstrates a really, really nice way to structure your JavaScript code in a type-safe way that is fun for developers to write. So that's my favorite feature,
Yeah,
discriminated types.
definitely. Sounds kind of like the name that some sort of dynamic typing or morphing of, based on different attributes. Sounds interesting. I haven't read about it, but I got the gist of it. My feature is pretty simpler because I learned object-oriented programming a while ago in college and everything, with Java and so on. So clearly, once I got into JavaScript, I didn't have to think about that anymore. But once I started to look into TypeScript and classes and so on, I like the fact that you can also define interfaces and you have your enums. You have a lot of those tools that the object-oriented programmer in me, that little piece of me that didn't die over time, it was that part of me was missing those features, and I liked seeing them, and they do what they have to do. Again, TypeScript is not fully object oriented, and that shouldn't be your expectation, but it goes quite far actually. So I really like that. For those, those moments where you have to, or when it makes sense to go object oriented. I also like that flexibility that it gives you. If you want to go functional, if you want to go object oriented, you actually can pick and choose instead of forcing you one way. So I like that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so that's it. My final question was actually going to be about your book, but you kind of already described it. So what you didn't say, and it might be useful to mention, is who's it meant for? Is it meant for people just getting started coding at all, or is it meant for people who have been coding for a decade or two, or is it for everyone?
Great question. It is not for people who are just getting into coding. All my
All right.
non-technical relatives who were very excited about me getting a book, I had to disappoint. They're not going to learn how to code from it, although my father-in-law is trying real hard from what I understand.
All
It is
right.
a book for people who know JavaScript. You don't have to know JavaScript at a super duper perfect expert level. You don't need to understand symbols. I don't think I ever actually referenced them more than
Used,
once or
yeah.
twice. Yeah, no one actually uses symbols in JavaScript, just
Yeah,
those library
yeah.
maintainers. It is for people who know JavaScript and probably, or maybe nothing else. You don't need to know C++ or Python or C Sharp or any of these other things. You don't need to know any specific languages or frameworks, React, Angular, Solid Vue, whatever. It's just you know JavaScript, you want to know how to add TypeScript on. So that's the target person. What you can expect from the book is it'll walk you through the fundamental, the foundational features in TypeScript, the things we've been talking about a little bit, like structural typing. What is that? What is the difference between that and duck typing? It'll teach you how TypeScript understands the flow of your code, how it can look at your variables and functions and whatnot, understand what types they are, be told by you what types they are when it can't infer them, and how it understands type narrowing, where you do some logic, you check something, and then if that check is, say, true, then the type might be something more specific. On top of that, it walks you through how all the parts of JavaScript that people typically use work with those features, like classes, how you can annotate class properties, or functional programming, how you can describe the types of functions to pass them around. And then finally, at the very end, it goes into the things that are important, but not core to the TypeScript type system. Things like definitely typed, the repository for people writing type definitions for packages. What is that? Why do you need that? What is a type definition? And at the very, very end, it goes into those ridiculous, fun, advanced features you mentioned, the conditional types, map types. And actually, I just made a mistake. I've been trying not to say beginner or advanced or similar words like that because I don't like conveying the concept of some things are easy and some things are hard because everyone learns differently. And advanced kind of implies that a junior developer wouldn't understand it, which is not the case. So, pardon me, let's pretend I said complex instead of advanced, because to me, those mean slightly different things.
That's fair. That's a fair distinction. All right, perfect. That's it. That's all the time we had for TypeScript. Now we have to go to the quick round section of the show where I ask the same set of questions to every guest. I
Great.
hope you came prepared. So, I mean, some people struggle with them. Don't laugh. So, what's the best advice you ever received?
Specific to me, I think it's if you're going to do something, do it well, which is advice from my father. I later learned that at least one serial killer has espoused that particular phrase. But before I
Well,
learned that, it was a great thing to hear because I think that if you're going to, say, write a program, it's a good idea to learn the language, learn the tooling before you just jump in there, or at least use the program as a way to learn those things. You're going to have a much better time if you're understanding the tools you're using than if you're just stumbling around trying to figure things out and not really attempting to learn.
true. Absolutely. Some people learn by stumbling around, though. Also, very valid
Oh, for
technique.
sure. Just sorry, I might have misspoke there. Just to be clear, stumbling around is great. That's how I learn oftentimes. But using stumbling around to learn is different than stumbling around and being upset. You
Yeah,
want to use
absolutely.
it as
Yeah,
a strategy. You don't want to just be unhappy.
yeah, I agree. So, what's the most exciting project you ever worked on?
Probably full screen Mario. It has a Wikipedia page. I ripped off the original Super Mario Brothers for NES and Game Boy and JavaScript. Now I later converted the game engine to TypeScript. It got taken down by Nintendo, but before it got taken down by Nintendo,
Wow. Okay, that's major, man.
yeah, I love legal action. That's how you know you've really made it in the industry.
Yeah.
It had like all the 32 original levels, random map generator, level editor. It was actually my version of stumbling around. I didn't know JavaScript. I certainly did not know game engines. So it was a terrible project, terrible performance, terrible code, hundreds of global variables. But it was a great way to learn, and it got me an internship at Microsoft. So that was a happy moment.
Nice. So you actually built the whole game in JavaScript and published it?
Yep. Fullscreenmario.com, a domain that I no longer own and regret letting lapse.
Oh, right. That's definitely interesting. So final question. What is one thing you wish you knew when you started coding that you eventually picked up over the years?
Ooh, good debugging skills. I guess no one knows that when they start coding because that's a thing that relies knowing coding. But being able to do more than just console log, in fact, knowing when and how to appropriately console log, that just leveled me up as a developer. Using a debugger, console logging the right variables, having an intuitive understanding of what type of things tend to go wrong when. That's juice right there. That's real good.
Absolutely. And you picked up on that only through sweat and blood. That's the only way.
Yeah. Yeah, sweat and blood. That's how you do
Yeah,
it.
that's the way. All right, that's it. So, can you tell our audience where they can find you, and if they want to know more about TypeScript or full screen Mario?
I would love to. I should answer with one of my current projects. Like I have this program that converts JavaScript to TypeScript, but no, the actual answer is that
Yeah,
one.
that's fair.
You can find me on Twitter, Joshua K. Goldberg, on GitHub, Joshua K. Goldberg, on Twitch, Joshua K. Goldberg, and my website, which has links to all of those, joshuakgoldberg.com. I don't think I ever mentioned this. I am a full-time open source maintainer, which means I work on the shared tooling projects, etc., that a lot of other folks use. Specifically, I work on TypeScript ESLint, which is neither TypeScript nor ESLint. It is the tooling that lets you run ESLint on your TypeScript code. It's also the tooling, fun fact, that Prettier uses to parse your TypeScript code, so we're real important. And we also add in a lot of good lint rules that can find bugs and enforce conventions in your JS and TS code. I don't work for any particular company. I instead get sponsored by folks on the internet. So if you think that things like linting your TypeScript code or formatting your TypeScript code might be important to you, I would strongly recommend sponsoring me and/or sponsoring TypeScript ESLint, because we work on a shoestring budget and I don't yet make minimum wage, which is a whole other conversation revolving around open source that we could get into. So github.com/Joshua K. Goldberg and TypeScript-ESLint.io.
All right, awesome. We'll definitely have that open source conversation. That's a pending invite. Um, that's it, folks. Thank you, Josh, again for coming in, having this time for us, and explaining why we should go with TypeScript. I'm pretty much convinced now.
Woo!
I don't know what I'll do, but I'm starting to see the line. All right, so thank you, and to everyone listening, thank you, and catch you on the next one.
Thanks, Fernando. This was fun.
And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't yet, take 10 seconds and leave a review of the show on your podcasting app. It will help us grow and reach more developers. And while you're at it, follow us on Twitter at the 20MinJS. This episode was brought to you by OpenReplay, an open source session replay platform for developers. Visit openreplay.com to know more. And I'll see you back here next week.